Alrighty, so picking up more or less where we left off the other day, we were going through, so the branching order. So evidence, we were going through 5 lines of evidence for evolution, all right? And we took some time to talk about each of these, basically show how life is organized, show that we have some remnant structures, and then show how genetically we are all connected in some way, shape, or form as well. There's like a base formula for no matter what kind of animal that you're making. And I'm sure, I don't know as much about plants as I do animals, but I'm sure it's a very similar sort of idea with the plants. Okay, the plant kingdom is much more related than we would guess as well. And then we talked about how, again, just bringing it back to the idea about the environment, how in the end the environment really is in charge, because we've noticed on like isolated populations, totally different continents, that happen to have the same environments, they tend to have the same kind of critters in them. So that was a neat little key. So now we're on to mechanisms. In other words, okay, so we're going to believe you that this is happening for the time being. So tell me, how the hell is it actually happening? Well, that's what this is, all right? These are 4 ideas, 4 ways, 4 mechanisms that tell us how evolution can work. And again, we'll have a slide at least on each of these, but we've got mutation, migration, genetic drift, and natural selection. And again, if you'll forgive me, I tend to try and make these more relatable. I might give some sort of ridiculous examples, but it's again just to try and make it more relatable. So, all right, why is that not working? Mutation. Mutation is a great word because everyone knows exactly what it means. The problem is that we talk about, when you get into this field, you talk about favorable mutations. And that is something right there that it kind of like throws up a roadblock. We were just talking about horror movies, and hardly anybody in a horror movie ever walks by and says, hey, nice mutation. No, it's like, you're mutated. Yep. We don't think about these things. But mutation is the ultimate source of variation in some ways, in many ways. Whether or not a mutation is at its core, let's see what we got here. Change in a DNA sequence usually occurring because of errors in replication or repair. So it is an error, okay? And the idea that you need to wrap your brain around is that sometimes it could be a good mistake. It could be a mutation that ends up being beneficial in some points. Yeah, mutation is the ultimate source of genetic variation. There it is right there. I know I'm not saying on day 1 you had one type of gene and everything since then has been a mutation. It's not necessarily that drastic. But mutations certainly took upon the base model and tweaked it, okay, in a number of ways. And as I said, mutations could be beneficial, neutral, or harmful. And we're used to really only thinking of them in one way. So the idea is that they are random. That should really probably be its own bullet. Okay? And I am gonna make that its own bullet just for future generations here. Until we get around and start mucking about ourselves as humans, of course. But, because we could certainly now go in and poke around and make our own mutations. But out in the wild. And then there's, again, the negative stuff. You think about radiation. Radiation causes mutations. That, unfortunately, is what cancer is. It's mutated, replicated cells. All right? Why they decide suddenly to start replicating incorrectly is oftentimes anybody's guess. Sometimes there is a reason, radiation, chemical, some sort of thing. But again, out in nature is what we're talking about. Okay, next is migration. I think just conversationally, a couple times I've used migration without maybe even using that word, but we've talked about the concept. The idea of introducing something new to the gene pool, okay? Where traditionally you've had a bunch of people, again, we'll just use people because it's a lot easier, with dark hair and dark eyes, okay? Then for whatever reason, a population of Norwegians move into your gene pool, and all of a sudden you have genes for light-colored hair and light-colored eyes. All right, I won't stereotype and say blonde hair and blue eyes, but you know, you've got new stuff in the mix. And vice versa could be said. You could have the same population moving to a northern country. All right. And if you want to talk about stuff like that, that's another thing, is that people are where they are for a reason. You look at different skin types, you look at different hair types, and you look at where those populations originated at. A lot of times it's because of things like the climate. And body forms, long and lean versus more short and squat, if you would. This plays all the way down to that level. Okay. Migration's a fairly easy one to understand. Yeah. So you introduce those into the gene pool. Now you still have all that stuff about dominant and recessive traits going on. Don't get me wrong. You still got to deal with the Punnett square. But given enough organisms bringing in these traits, you could certainly mix them in over several generations. Especially because, and again, it's hard not to giggle because we think about humans, but especially because oftentimes this is seen as something new and favorable, and everybody wants to, mate with them. So it happens more frequently than not sometimes. So migration. Genetic drift. Genetic drift, again, is back to randomness. All right. We have a cool lab that I like to do in my historical geology class, 102, where we've got, 50 red beads and 50 blue beads, okay? And the idea is that they are to simulate random mating, which again makes everybody giggle. So they reach in, and the bag, it's in a brown paper bag, and they grab 2 beads each time, okay? And they set them on this little tray that's meant to hold little beads. And they're either going to get what? 2 blue beads, 2 red beads, or a blue and a red bead, right? And statistically, if you've had a stats class, you should be able to predict, if you've got 50 red and 50 blue, you should be able to predict a spectrum, what you're going to get. Yes, sir?
So, like, the third bullet point is evolution due to chance, not such. It's like a lottery, basically?
Yeah, well, I'm not even there yet, but yeah, that's certainly, it is. It's randomness, totally. All right, so again, statistics tells us what we could or should expect. But if we do this enough times, or if we have enough groups in lab doing it, we see that we don't always get that. All right, and that's genetic drift. It's the same idea. You're playing Monopoly with your friends, and you roll snake eyes 3 times in a row, or double sixes 3 times in a row. You're not supposed to, but it happens. All right, that's what genetic drift is. Punnett squares be damned kind of thing. So it's a sampling error, the evolutionary equivalent of a sampling error. They just don't replicate the way they should. This one kind of sounds like a cop-out, from the evolutionist perspective, the geneticist perspective. That's like, okay, well, and sometimes stuff just doesn't work. Okay, that's true, but do we need to include that? But it's seen enough, and again, we could replicate it in a lab environment. So there's the science part of it. We could repeat it. That it is important enough. So it's not just a cop-out saying genetic drift. And again, to go back to your question about the last bullet point there, that is worth pointing out. That's probably why I typed it. This has nothing to do with the environment selecting stuff. It's just randomness. Okay. All right. How does this fit back into our list? Genetic drift, natural selection. Okay. So this little conversation here is really an offshoot from genetic drift here. I just want to introduce a couple words. Genotype and phenotype being those words. So phenotype is what you see. Phenotype is when you look around the room and you see all of these different kinds of people. You look outside and you see all the different kinds of birds, so on and so forth. Genotype is what you can't see. You could look at someone or something and not realize, usually because we stereotype, that's what we do, but not realize that they have the genetic components in them for red hair. Well, how the hell did you end up with a redhead? Well, you know, there's somebody down the line, such and such.
I mean, I've been mistaken for genotype, so.
There you go. There you go. So genotype is more an expression of that gene pool, all right? And that is how every so often somebody random in your family shows up with characteristics that don't look like everyone else in the family. And then they, because they exist, they have the potential then to pass on those genetics and potentially change the phenotype of your family down the line. So, at any rate, so phenotype versus genotype, when you're reading through the book, you're going to see it show up a lot. And this goes back to talking about Gregor Mendel and his pea plants again. You know, they were able to figure this stuff out, even though they had zero clue, you know, about DNA and genes and crap like that. They just noticed, they paid attention. You know, there's a lot less stuff going on in their world probably. They didn't have phones to stare at and so on and so forth, and TV before that. You know, we used to have people veg out in front of the television. It wasn't always, every generation there's something to get lost in. But arguably, you know, a couple hundred years ago, newfangled things were books, right? So, at any rate, they noticed over the years of having a same population that every so often something would show up, and then guess what? When you bred that with something else, it could pass that on. So they knew something was going on, but they didn't have the words for it. They didn't have the science for it. So that's what this slide's talking about. All right. And then again, back to natural selection. We started this conversation by talking about natural selection an hour and a half ago, whenever it was the other day. And what we have now, we're using some slightly different terms now that we've got more vocabulary under our belts. So we have differential survival and or reproduction rates of different genotypes in a population, leading to changes in the gene frequencies in said population. And then to apply that, all right, to apply that, we say if you have variation, do we have variation? This is sort of a call and response here. Do we have variation? Look around the room. Do we have variation? Yes, yes. Do we have differential reproduction? All of you going to reproduce equally? No. All right. Do you have heredity?
Yeah.
Okay, then you will have evolution by natural selection. Ha, I just proved it to you. So it is that simple, and it is also that complex, because of course behind those simple words is, you know, bless you, hundreds of years of science and thinking and this, that, and the other thing. But it really is that straightforward, okay? Because of all of that, this happens. All right, switching gears again, and again, arguably these slides should have been, some of these slides should have been back before when we talked about it. I acted like, I'm like, wait, where's that slide? It's here, because we're talking about convergence again. So convergent evolution, two different lineages, in other words, two different organisms, okay, evolve similar characteristics completely independently of one another because of the environment, all right? Because of, even more so, to borrow a word from earlier, way earlier in our conversation, because of an available niche, is what it really boils down to. If there's a niche in an environment available, a living space, a way to make a living, and there's an organism that could even attempt to fit into it, they will, because it means less selective pressure from somewhere else. Okay? Again, let's go back to the gray squirrels and the red squirrels or something like that. All right? Let's say that one of them is slightly larger than the others and able to maintain its body heat a little better. Maybe it could move to a slightly different niche where it's not quite as warm. They could move higher up a mountain. Okay, I'm weaving a story that doesn't make sense. Squirrels don't live in mountains, but you get my point. All right, they're not exactly supposed to be there, but because they could fit into that niche, all right, they can thrive there. So the environment shapes what organisms live there. So it shouldn't be a surprise, again, that when we split up continents, look at similar environments all over the place, that we tend to see the same organisms there. It just makes sense. Again, we talked about the bat, gnat, and bird, bat, and gnat. It shows a fly here, but it rhymes, so I go with bird, bat, and gnat. We've got wings, but all derived from different origins. But there was a niche available where a flying organism could make a go of it. So someone that had that ability in the first place, and maybe it wasn't even great big wings on day one, okay? But again, selected over time. Bigger wings meant getting more food, meant getting more reproduction, meant getting those genes more in the gene pool. These next two slides are just comparing two words that you've probably heard of, but they're a little difficult to separate sometimes. Analogous and homologous. A homolog and an analog. All right. So wings of bats, birds, and insects are analogous. They have separate evolutionary origins, but are superficially similar because they evolved the same, serve the same function. So an analog is same but different. All right. A homolog, on the other chance, is a characteristic that we may use slightly differently, but has the same origins. The four limbs of tetrapods. All right. Tetra means four. You are tetrapods. Your dog is a tetrapod. A bird is a tetrapod. Yet, we all look and act a little differently. The dog walks on all four of those pods. All right. We're on two of them. Our other two are actually rather similar to the two we walk on. They're just a little more useful. Many of you have quite possibly grabbed things with your feet before, right? You're not exactly prehensile down there with your feet, but you can make a go of it. But our hands are way better at that. And then what did I use? A bird a minute ago? Again, the bottom back two legs are arguably similar to the dog and the human, but the front two, way different. So those are all homologous features. So they end up looking different, but they actually have the same origins. All right. Now this is kind of just randomness at the end. I apologize. That happens sometimes at the end of a PowerPoint. You're like, oh, I forgot to mention this. I forgot to mention that. That's where we are now. So arguably this slide should be slid back to go with when we talked about convergence a couple minutes ago. This is the placentals versus the marsupials. Your placentals. Pretty much every mammal you know, with the exception of a possum. All right. Possums are marsupials. But in America, of course, you know about kangaroos. I know you know that. But around here, every animal you've seen is a placental. All right. They have equivalents in Australia, but there are a few other places, but everyone knows Australia, where all of the same roles are filled by very similar types of mammals. And these are still mammals. They're just a different type of mammal. All right. And there's a third type of animal, kind that lay eggs. There are a few mammals that lay eggs. And they're the marsupials here, but you see they're rather similarness. A mouse is a mouse is a mouse, right? No matter whether it makes a nest for its babies or it has a teeny tiny little mouse pouch.
Oh, yeah, I have a question. Are possums like vicious, dangerous?
I know not their disposition.
No possums.
Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you they're known for playing dead, right? Playing possum. They are rather timid and skittish because we did have a possum. See, you pulled a string there. Back when I was in college, we lived in the very tippy top of a house, so we had like 36 stairs up to this area where we lived, and up there is where we kept. I don't even think we had our trash can up there, but maybe also say arguably it was our trash was up there. I think it was my grill he was after, but there was a possum up there, and we didn't know till we were halfway up the stairs, and we see those little beady eyes staring at us, and. Last thing we wanted, of course, was for him to jump off the little landing there because we were 3 stories up. But he did not attack us. Short story long. But I wouldn't go pet one if I were you. But nonetheless, I don't think you don't need to worry about being attacked by one. All right. This is ancient footage. Somebody turned it into a GIF. This is the Tasmanian wolf, which they are still. Whenever I see an article about this, I do try to I do read it. They still are saying that there might be a Tasmanian wolf or two out there. This is the last one that was alive in the Humboldt Zoo. I forget what zoo he was in. And again, cool striping aside. For all intents and purposes, he looks just like any other sort of wolfy kind of thing, except there's a pouch. He has a pouch. And instead of, giving birth to baby wolves that are ready to go, as much as, most mammals are ready to go, they crawl up and up into the pouch and finish up their development in there. And again, we don't necessarily try to go too much into the socio end of things in this class. That's a lot more for your archaeology classes and sociology classes, stuff like that. But when you talk about, and right now is what it always reminds me, this is I'll go back here. Think about if you've ever had puppies or kittens born in your house, let alone a human, born in your family. They are more or less helpless, at the beginning. There's a few. We had guinea pigs born at our house. Guinea pigs are up and about within about 5 minutes. Quite different than puppies and kittens, all right, and definitely different than little peoples. That would not have worked out if we hadn't also, while this evolution was going on, developed societies around it. That whole "it takes a village" thing. You would not have been able as a mother to give birth out on even in a cave. It's a horribly messy process if you're not familiar with it. I see your hand. Give me a minute. If there wasn't someone nearby with a club, waiting to keep off whatever kind of animal was there and smelling that mess, let alone wanting the crying baby. It just wouldn't have happened. All right. So when we look at this marsupialism, we think perhaps maybe then that they were growing up evolved in a more isolated kind of thing. They had smaller groups, smaller packs and stuff. But again, that's not, my line of things. But these conversations definitely go that way. And again, it's a common thread through many of these sciences when they discuss. They don't argue necessarily, but they discuss the evolution of societies and so on and so forth. It all goes hand in hand. Yes, sir.
What about the Tasmanian devil?
What about him?
Does that tie into this or not? And are they related?
Well, he is a mammal. and he lives in Tasmania. But
Tasmania.
it's down by Australia.
Okay. Yeah, because the first time I heard about Tasmanian devil, he moved.
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, it's much smaller too. Tasmanian devil is about the size of a raccoon, I think. So again, going back to the conversation about velociraptors, it just wouldn't have made us for a funny of a joke if he was a tiny little thing. But and they don't spin around in circles either. Pretty sure about that. So
Yeah, that's just the cartoon.
yeah. So anyhow, we've been watching this wolf here for a few minutes, and as you could, like I said, in every other purpose, it acts exactly like a dog would, and there is no other difference. So my point being, we could extrapolate that back to any one of these critters would act and be just like one of the ones you're familiar with. It's just a slightly different reproductive thing. But the point is that you're thousands and thousands of miles away. Australia separated off way early. All right, it really is a laboratory in many ways itself. But Australia is separated away from the other continents very, very early. And not coincidentally, apparently, life evolved in much the same way. So, pretty cool stuff. Oh, there was one more picture. It's not going to let me see it. Come on. So, last Tasmanian wolf in captivity. Yeah, Hobart Zoo. Wow, I remembered that. Thylaceus, cynocephalus, may survive in the wild, but this was the last one in captivity. And if any argument could be made for a zoo, I mean, I go to zoos, I take my kids to zoos, but they're not happy places for animals. Everybody knows that. If any argument could be made for them, it is sort of species preservation, and to get a breeding population up and going again. But in this case, it didn't work out. We hunted these guys. We killed these guys. Just everyone hears about the dodo, right? We killed the dodo off. They shot these guys, every single last one of them. So that's what we do, right? Again, somewhere over, I'm going to guess in Tasmania, but could be New Zealand, Australia over there, and they're much farther away than we stereotype. It's not like going from New York to Pennsylvania, right, by any means, but they are in close proximity to one another, relatively speaking. But yeah, my first guess would be Tasmania. Yeah, there are. The tails are different, for one thing. Tails look quite different. The stripes, like I said, stripes are neither here nor there. That, again, is probably a trait based on the vegetation there, that just kind of favored having stripes because it helps you blend in with, shrubbery better than grasslands. If you live in grasslands, you're going to have different, kind of like how up in the snowy areas we've got the Arctic hares. They're all white. The gray and the black ones, they got eaten by hawks. So you leave all the ones that blend in behind. Yeah, it's, I don't necessarily know why stripes come in, but that's, a good argument for it as any. Now, giraffe pattern, I don't know about that one. I can't argue that. But again, presumably there's some reason that animals have the patterns that they have. So I'm glad you guys are asking questions. It certainly does make things more interesting, and it's also a great sign of engagement and so on and so forth. But more so from my point, it means that you're kind of sort of getting what we're talking about, and it's making you think about related things. So that's awesome. This conversation can obviously go in a lot of different directions, and we could spend a lot more time talking about it. But again, the focus, and I tried to keep bringing it back to the focus, is that it's the environment, okay, that's responsible for not just the animals but the vegetation that's in it. And so when we, and to get back up on the soapbox for a couple minutes here, when we go mucking about and changing environments and then get confused as to why, the animals died or left or did whatever they did. You're changing what they were built to live in, effectively. So they often don't have a choice or a chance. And again, when you to a scientist, or I don't even say a scientist, it's someone who understands this stuff, it's a no-brainer. But a large chunk of the population didn't have this exposure. So the fact that you guys are going forward in life knowing this stuff, hopefully, at the very least, when you hear some politician spouting off on TV or the radio, and you're with your children in 15 years, and you'll say, well, honey, that guy just doesn't know what he's talking about. It really makes sense if such and such, this is going to happen. It doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge to understand this stuff. So, all right, so we're winding up this conversation, and we're moving on to the rest of Chapter 5.